everybody. Thank you so much for being here today on our Go Live meeting. We have a special guest, Deanna, is going to join us today to talk about anxiety. And of course, those of you who have seen us before, we have Kira and Deb and Mike, as well as me, Elizabeth, joining Deanna here today. We're very excited to have you, Deanna. For those of you who are just kind of getting your feet wet with what we're doing, so Care for Nurses is a community created to really provide nurses a place for support, advice, and to talk about any ongoing challenges that you have, whether it's professionally or personally, and give you a place to come to just really get that feedback. So there's a couple different ways to engage, and if you're here with us today, this is one of them. So thank you for being here today. If you're listening to us recorded, again, thanks for taking the time to listen to us. So we're going to just jump right in, and Deanna, I'm going to pass the baton to you and let you get started.
All right. Hi, everybody. Glad you are joining us, and thank you for inviting me. I guess I should introduce myself. I'm a licensed professional counselor. I have a specialty certification in mental health and substance use disorder, and I've been in the field 30 years. So more than just a minute, right? And we talked about doing this as anxiety, and what I find from working with both mental health, behavioral health now, and substance use disorders is that a lot of people interchange stress and anxiety and use the same word, and they are two really and truly different things. The way that I best describe it is the anxiety is internal, stress is external. So a stress would be you're in a hurry, you go to grab your keys from the place they're supposed to be, to run to work, and they're not there. You have this moment of panic, right? So that's truly panic because it's an internal body system kind of thing that happens. So you can get really focused and you try to find your way. But the stress is that you can't find your keys. That's not anxiety, that's stress. Because what happens as soon as you find your keys and you head out the door, the internal body mechanisms go, shh, okay, I'm good, right? Anxiety could show up in the internal language where you start saying, oh, now I'm going to be late for work and I'm going to have a terrible day and I'm not going to get this done and I'm not going to get that done. That's internal. And if that keeps the internal anxiety going, then it turns from stress to anxiety. That's the easiest way that I can tell you those kind of things. If you're really stressed, right, you can take a really deep breath and bring your internal body mechanisms back down. Typically good to go, and you go about your day. So I want to talk about anxiety specifically today, and just some of the things to think about with anxiety. Um, Again, anxiety is internal mechanism. So what you may notice is that you have dryness inside your mouth, right? Difficulty breathing. When you're talking, you're having to take deeper breaths in order to get language out, or an inability to talk if you're super stressed or have panic. Trembling in your hands or your feet, or numbness in your hands or feet. Okay. Um, Worried about situations where you might panic and make a fool of yourself, right? So now I'm going to bring back all that other stuff where I might be embarrassed, or I might make a fool of myself, or I might say the wrong thing. Again, internal mechanisms. Okay. Being close to panic, you have this overwhelming fear of having this panic that you can't function in the situation that you happen to be in. Aware that you have, like, your heart's kind of going a little bit funky and there's no reason for it. Yeah, you wake up in the middle of the night and you're having sweats and you're having this panic like something really bad's happening, and there's nothing that happened except that you were asleep. Right? All of those are anxiety things, right? Notice that I didn't say anything about hard to wind down, overreacting to situations, using up energy, getting agitated. Those things are stress, right? And that's how we have to start to differentiate between those two spaces and those two places. All right. So internal body reaction is anxiety. External pressure is stress. That's the best and easiest way to go about that. All right. So we're talking about anxiety today, and I know that at least for my clients, they walk in and then we figure out it's either anxiety or stress, and I do a little screening tool. And if you want to do your own, it's the one that I use is the Depression and Anxiety and Stress Scale. So it's DASS 21, and you can find that online. It's a free form. You can use it at any point, and you can almost grade yourself and see what it really is because it also has depression in there. A lot of people use the word anxiety when they're truly depressed because it feels like I have all these things going on and I can't stop them.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So just kind of having an idea that those are all different things, but we as a society use those words so interchangeably
Right.
that we don't really know what we're talking about. So you'll hear somebody say, "Oh, I'm anxious," and somebody will say, "Well, just breathe."
Mm.
Right? That works great for stress. An anxious person is going to look at you and go, I am breathing. Right. I already am breathing. What's wrong with
Right.
you? Or I'm not sure what you think, what you're thinking. We talk about mindfulness for anxiety, which is a great thing, but most people with anxiety can't slow down enough to be mindful. So when we're talking about mindful, we're talking about paying attention to what's happening to us, paying attention to what's happening in our body. My people with anxiety go, I know what's happening. My hands go numb, my legs go numb, my heart beats really fast, I can't catch my breath, and you're telling me to breathe. Like, what is wrong with you? Right? As
Mm-hmm.
a therapist, you're telling me to breathe and I can't breathe. What the heck? And so being aware, okay, that if you have anxiety, most anxieties you have to practice when you're not in the middle of an anxiety attack or you're not in the middle of a panic attack. If you're going to learn breathing techniques, if you're going to learn mindfulness techniques, all of those happen independent of the anxiety because you're not going to be able to instantly use it, right? So oh, so and so told me if I would just breathe, I could settle my anxiety. Well, that's true, but if you haven't trained yourself and practiced, it's not true. It makes it worse. Okay.
So, Deanna, do you see anxiety as a kind of come and go thing, or can somebody be anxious all the time and not have time to practice?
Right. So there are people who can be anxious all the time, but typically what I see is that there are peaks and valleys of that anxiety. So low level anxiety for some people is consistent. Okay. And for me, just my own philosophy is that people who have low level anxiety typically have had it from the time they're very young,
Mm.
Hmm.
right? So anxiety that tends to peak shows up for people when they haven't handled their stress, right? Or something happens, right? A death, a car accident, things like that. Um, so there's two different ways of looking at it and two different ways of dealing with it. So when we see younger kids that have this anxiety that, unfortunately right now is pretty big,
Right.
right? We have lots and lots of children really struggling with behavioral health. We have lots of adults really struggling with behavioral health and anxiety. And so, I hate blaming COVID for so much because everybody says, well, it's COVID. But
Sure.
COVID gave us a chance to stay home. Most people, not nurses, okay? Some nurses, but not most nurses and not most people, right, who worked in, say, retail health or retail. So all of a sudden, retail people are really, really important people, and there's a lot of stress on them having to deal with people day to day. Nurses go from, maybe if they're in a hospital setting, having, say, 4 beds or 8 beds that they have to deal with and care for. Well, now all of a sudden the COVID, now I've got 16 or 20 beds. So now you've doubled my workload and I have to deal with my family at home. And so we see a lot of trauma turning into anxiety for nurses on that level because it does the workforce for nurses right now hasn't come back down into a reasonable level. And we see nurse jobs available everywhere. And not just nurses, but everybody. But if we think about COVID, COVID was a time for all of America to get very quiet. You got to determine how you were going to be in your world every day. You got to determine what was going to be the music, what was going to be on your TV, what you were going to eat. Even if there was a little bit of scarcity about what you were normally having, you still could control that. Groceries got shipped to your house. You didn't have to go out unless you wanted to. And that's not how the world works normally. Right? If you have a job, you have to get up, you have to go out, you have to deal with people, you have to deal with those constant give and take emotions. But if we just think about the noise itself, the noise itself. So now I'm home by myself and I control all the noise in my house. And then I go back to work and there's music over the loudspeaker and there's people talking over the loudspeaker and there's, the alarms buzzing on the hospital unit and there's, this rush and that rush. And now I've got the doctors to listen to and my other nurses and how am I going to, right? And all of a sudden, I want you to think about just how I'm talking about that, how all of a sudden my breath is catching and I'm having a hard time breathing and I'm just thinking about that, right? And those are all unconscious. None of what I just said has anything to do with how I feel personally in my body, but because we really and truly have to start thinking about those because we went from our quiet space, just being at work can be overwhelming and our heart's beating a little faster, right? So I want you to think about that piece is all the background noise that we encounter every day that we don't really have a say-so about. Okay. Now add to it getting back and forth to work, right? So we didn't have to run our kids to school, right? We didn't have to stop and get groceries. We didn't have to do all the extracurriculars, all the things. So now I got to get to work. So now I got to get my kids dressed again. I went from a year of the kids being home to now I got to figure out how to get them ready too, right?
Good point.
Okay, so now we're adding even more stress. All of that stress can come internal because our internal bodies respond. Remember we said anxiety is internal. If we can get rid of the stress, then sometimes the body calms down, but if the body doesn't, okay, and that's how for some people anxiety becomes their day to day. Because now all of a sudden I can't handle this shift. And I don't want to say I can't handle it. Maybe that's not the correct terminology, but it's so much
Right.
that it's overwhelming. And it's overwhelming for lots of people. And so now we're going to take it more to society. Have we not noticed how irritable people are?
That's a kind word sometimes.
Okay. And what I want to tell you is that most of this irritability has to do with the anxiety of being back in the world. And it's just been recently that we're starting to see people calm down and start talking about trying to get along again, right? And so anxiety can come out as irritability. And now you're my best buddy, and now you're always, and I'm like, shh, when I don't realize that really what's happening is you're really anxious in the world and you haven't figured out how to maneuver. This is the same thing that we see for young nurses just coming to work.
Right.
Okay. So you're coming out of school and maybe you haven't really worked a lot, so now all of a sudden you got to figure out how to get to work, how to get the kids to school, who's going to take care of them when they're sick. But then they get to work and they're overwhelmed with all the sounds and all the things and everybody talking to them. And for a lot of people, we go, what is wrong with you? We all did this and we're fine. We all didn't do this. We want to say we did, but we didn't. None of us came out of a place of where we could control ourselves and what's happening in our lives for almost a whole year and then have to find a new job and figure out how to be in that new job and learning that skill and now be responsible for people who are very ill, who could be dying. Most of us haven't had to deal with people who are dying at the rate that our nurses had to handle the death rates over these past few years. And we're getting ready to go back into lots of different COVIDs, lots of the flus. You know,
Right.
those seasons are consistent for our nurses. Okay. So I know that's a little,
No, I think, I mean,
that's a little much. I got you.
no, it's not. It really, it's got my brain thinking. And what I hear you saying is the anxiety isn't necessarily something that I'm doing to myself. There's nothing wrong with me.
That's right.
It's circumstantial. It's situations surrounding and how my body is choosing to respond to those.
Right.
Right? Yeah, I think I'm
Sure.
and so one of my questions is how do we identify that transition from a stress to an anxiety? Like, at what point does it become anxiety? And how can I determine, wait a minute, this is becoming something more, or this is something different? What can I do about it? Because I can find myself starting to become panicky.
Yeah.
That there's something wrong with me. My heart rate's racing. I'm suddenly not feeling good. My stomach's not feeling good, and I'm getting sweaty. Is there something wrong with me? And then you start to get in like this downward spiral. So, at what point, how can we start to identify that?
Great. That's a great question, Elizabeth. And what I will tell you is that there are many, many people who end up in our emergency rooms believing that they're having heart attacks, heart
Mm-hmm.
palpitations, and then they get diagnosed with anxiety, and
Mm-hmm.
then they walk out and go, "What is wrong with me?"
Mm-hmm.
Right? If we could go in and they say, "Oh yeah, you're having heart problems," we walk out and go, "Okay, I'm having heart problems, and this is what I can do with it."
Yeah.
When we walk out with anxiety, they just say, you just have anxiety. Go home, it'll be fine. So at that level, I really wish that there was a way that they could refer people to therapists right away,
Mm.
right?
Yeah.
You know, and kind of do that. We also know that being the professionals we are, we want a quick fix.
Mm-hmm.
And I want to tell you that taking a pill is not going to fix it. It's going to make it feel better for a little while, but it's not going to fix it. We really do have to work on these issues of mindfulness and things like that. So one of the things that I like to say is if you're dealing with somebody who has anxiety, just know if you just get them a cold compress and put it on the back of their neck, it will shock the system back into thinking. So what anxiety does is it takes away the frontal lobe or our decision making process. So if you run across somebody who's having anxiety, typically they're curling into themselves, they're pulling their legs up, they're grabbing a pillow or a blanket, almost fetal, for lack of a better way to say it, right? That's what's happening because you're so afraid and your heart's beating and you can't breathe. And now what's a typical response when you're afraid? You curl up. Okay. So if you can get a cold compress, it kind of shocks the body and goes, oh, wait a minute, something else is going on here.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So that's just one of the smallest things that I can tell you that might help someone because what we want to do is we want to change the body situation. Okay. As you kind of transition. So what I can tell you is if you can go home and you can take a deep breath and you can let your day go and you can slow your own heart rate, you're fine. The blend over comes when you can no longer do that.
Mm. Yep.
That's when it becomes anxiety. When you can no longer, slow your when you say, "Oh, I just need a drink." If I go home and I just have a drink, that'll calm me down. If I just have a smoke on a marijuana, if I, whatever. if I just eat, if I just gamble, if I just shop, like all of the things, right? There's so many more things that people do, right? Compulsive washing. Um, so my recommendation is always to get a routine between work and home. So if your routine might be you go home, you catch a shower, then you go get your kids.
Mm-hmm.
Because you've got a few minutes there to take a deep breath. Showers, for the most part, calm everybody down. Not everybody, but typically 98% of America calms down with a good shower. Okay. You change your clothes. That's another signal to your body. Hey, something's different. This texture feels different. Um, Gidgets, widgets, whatever. We see all these stress
Right.
reduction kind of things, and they all work.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So when you're talking or whatever, you kind of have these things going on. If you're to a point where you're really like, okay, I'm ready to do something, one of the simplest techniques that I have that I ask people to practice over and over and over is to put your dominant hand on your heart and your non-dominant on your belly button, right? There is something about this for all of us. I want you to think about, how do you hug your person?
Mm-hmm.
When we grab a baby, most of us don't grab a baby out here. We grab them like this and we snuggle them in. Okay. So doing this maneuver typically will make us draw a deep breath. It's an unconscious kind of thing that happens, but it will typically make us draw a deep breath. And so what I work with my clients is to teach them to draw their breath all the way down to their belly button and just hold it to the count of 3. Some people can, some people can't. Right? But this is something easy to practice, because the other thing that anxiety takes away from us is our ability to think, oh, this is going to be all right. So we want to think, oh, everybody's
Yes.
looking at me. Everybody's paying attention, whatever. This is one that you could literally do at every stoplight,
Mm-hmm.
right? So you stop at the stoplight, you do this really quick, you take a deep breath, you breathe to 3, and then you let it go. And then you go down the road. And then you stop at the next stoplight, because all of this is training. I am a firm believer that if we train ourselves and our bodies, then when we need it, it will just come
That's
naturally.
right. Absolutely.
Okay. That's why the military is so good for young people. It's training, training, training.
Yeah.
So when there's time to panic, there's no panic because they've already been trained, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So, Deanna, do you see it with nurses, especially? Do you see any common times where you feel like they can't do it themselves? They should see. When would I know that I'm not helpful to myself? So I need to see somebody else or talk to a counselor. Or
Great
what are
question.
any red flags for that?
Yes. Dreading going to work. The minute you think about going in, your breathing starts to happen. You start getting irritable. You start to think, oh, I don't like this. Typically you have a crew and you've gotten along with them for a good year, and then all of a sudden you start going, oh, I don't like that one. I don't like that one. I don't like how they do it. And they're not right, right? Because some protective measures for people is inherently to get on your own,
Right.
Okay.
right? So I think that those 2 things are, for me, the number 2 indicators, right?
Okay.
One is you're really dreading heading to work and you start going in late and you're always coming up with excuses why you can't go, or even getting sick. You start getting sick a lot, right? And then 2, the team that you've always loved before, now not so much.
Right.
Interesting. Thank you.
Yeah.
So I'm loving this. Like I I can relate with so much of this, and I wish some of that little hugging tip. I'm doing it now.
Yeah.
Man, that's gold. I can't believe how well that works. Like, I'm not super anxious right now, but like it still makes me feel kind of
Yes.
warm inside.
Yeah.
But so the thing that the question I guess I have, and I don't know the right way to say this, but like I know I've had jobs in the past where I got a pit in my stomach thinking about going to work, and like pulling to the parking lot made me kind of nauseous.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, okay, my instinct is I need a new job,
Right.
but maybe it's I need to work on myself.
Right.
how many people don't need a new job or change their circumstance? They need to work on themselves.
Mm-hmm.
How do you tell somebody that?
That
That's
that
my
is a really
dilemma.
good question, and I'm not sure there's a way to tell somebody that, right? Other than to say, "Hey, I hear you. Are you sure you aren't having some anxiety?" Right? Because that sounds like anxiety to me. That doesn't sound like a work issue. Now, work could be causing it. Absolutely. That those feelings of inferiority, embarrassment, depending on who your boss is,
Right.
sometimes they're not so good, those kind of things. But, really taking time then to go, okay, what is it about this job? What is it about this job that has me so bothered or so upset that I'm sitting here in the parking lot nauseous trying to figure out if I should just go home? And if you can't pinpoint it, that's a time to go to therapy.
Mm, that's a great one. And
Yeah.
I hear what comes to mind when I hear you say this, you and Mike, is that maybe I could journal, right? Certain patterns. So if I recognize, and this is something honestly I've recognized in myself, on Sundays I am a lot more grouchy. I'm a lot more grouchy on Sundays. And and as the day progresses, I get a little bit more grouchy. And sometimes I've had to realize it's truly because the week that's facing me feels very daunting. And I
Right.
know that once I go to bed, I wake up and I have to hit the ground running and just take off.
Right.
But I didn't recognize that at first. Um, I had people telling me, wow, it's a Sunday, you're grouchy. Why am I grouchy on a Sunday? But it became a pattern that I needed to recognize and started journaling. And that being able to put some thoughts of how I was feeling, of whatever I was feeling, I
Mhm.
was able to see some trends and then recognize why I was feeling the way I was feeling. Um, but I don't know. That's just a suggestion I had.
Sure.
Ours seems realistic.
And it is very realistic. And people who journal,
Mm-hmm.
that is an excellent thing,
Yeah.
right? For other people, it may be making a list of what they're facing this coming week and putting it in some kind of order where it's not so daunting, right? So making a list, and it may include, okay, so I have to do something for the kids to school, and we got these projects, and then I have to do this at work, and then I have to clean my house because we're expecting guests over the weekend, and you have all these things, right? But if you can break that down and break it into like categories or subdivisions, right? The truth of the matter is it takes less than 5 minutes to clean a sink.
Right. Right. But that can feel like a really big deal
Right.
on Sunday night when you're
Yes.
flipping through your head
Yes.
Yeah. No,
all the things.
Right?
it's such a good point, though. I've been working even just this week on like, okay, you've got all these projects, everything seems overwhelming. But instead of focusing on the end of the project, right, focus on the step ahead of you. Just that one thing. Because, like you're saying, that one thing might take 5 minutes and then it's done. But if you look at everything together, then it's like, I'm going to
Right.
panic,
Yeah.
Absolutely. One piece at a time helps so much.
And
And
the
then
list,
crossing it off. I'm sorry. Go
Yeah.
ahead, Mike.
no, just getting it down, the brain dump.
Yeah.
And the list could be daunting, but it's like, at least I got it out. Like, my brain's not going to leave me alone until I get it, like, taking action, and writing it down
Yeah.
is action, right?
Yeah.
Absolutely. And then the journaling too, taking the list further, the journaling, I journal every day and I found like to start my day like that makes me so much less anxious because I'll write the things that I have to do and then the things that are on my mind and just absolutely everything, right? Because then when you're done, you'll be like, okay, now let me start fresh. I'm
Yeah.
not carrying that with me anymore, any of it, any of the thoughts about it either, right? That's what the list wouldn't get you. I like the list because you make the list, which is brain dumping, like Mike said. But the good thing, you reward yourself every time you cross something off.
Yes.
There's that little self gratification.
Yes.
Cross that off, and
Yeah,
I think that gets
great
anxiety under control
suggestions,
too. I can do this. I can get this down.
Right.
Right.
I'm going to get this A, B, and C done, and then I'm going to go and, take a quick walk outside. I'm going to come back in and get C done, and then C is a big one. So I'm going to then go and, have lunch, and I'm going to have a little treat after lunch, whatever it may be. So I think that that's helpful as well. Well, I can't believe it's already time to conclude. Fabulous conversation, excellent tips and suggestions. And I'm going to say that this is one I'm going to go back and rewatch. So as soon as I post it, I'm gonna rewatch it because I really want to go now having gone through this entire talk, I'm gonna go back and rewatch that beginning and kind of break it down. So those of you who are watching or listening to this, keep this one, flag this one, because I think it would be helpful if you are starting to experience some of those thoughts or concerns that come back and listen to it. And if you have any feedback or questions for Deanna after you've viewed this, please put them in the comments below and we will certainly get back to you. Deanna will be able to pop in and answer them as well. So if you have specific questions, that you can email us at team@carefornurses.com. If you don't want it to be published with your name, we'll keep that private. So however we can help support you, please reach out, let us know. And we love all types of feedback. So share with us. Thank you so much for being here today, everyone. It was so amazing. And Deanna, we can't wait to have you back.
Thank you.
Yes,
Definitely need a part 2 on this.
Yes.
Yeah.
we do.
Big topic.
That was so good. Thank you.
All right.
You're
Well, I
welcome.
hope you all have a fabulous rest of your day, and we will see y'all on the platform soon.
All right.
Okay.
Bye,
All
guys.
right. Bye.
All right.